Hello, this is Stephanie.
And this is Brian.
Welcome to the making and the remaking of A Codependent Mind.
We're continuing with this season where we talk about relationship tools.
So the first tool we talked about was this idea of lean startup, this way of approaching decision making. And then last episode was empathy as a tool. But it occurred to us that before we talk more about different tools that you can use to make your relationship work, that maybe we should talk about what relationship work is itself.
That's something I hear a lot, that relationships take work, but I never really quite put a lot of thought into what that meant. And usually I'm hit with negative ideas when I think of that, like work.
Even in my past, this idea that relationships take work, I've equated that with the idea that relationships are hard. So it's very vague. We all know we're supposed to work at relationships,
Mm-hmm.
but have we really thought of what that work is and how to evaluate whether you're doing good work, whether you're doing bad work, or whether you're doing the right work, for instance?
Yes, right. Exactly, yeah.
So again, before we got too far into the tools that we use to make a relationship work, we thought we should just dip into this topic of what is the work of a relationship.
And how can we approach it emotionally, too? How do we just approach the idea of work emotionally when it comes to relationship work?
We've mentioned this Canadian physician who works in trauma and addiction a lot, Gabor Mate. I'm going to mention him again because he's just so smart on the issue of childhood trauma. And one of the things he says about children, young children in particular, is that they should have to do no work in the relationship with their caregivers. They should not have to make that relationship work. All the work should be done by the adults surrounding them. The relationship is there to get the needs of the child met, not the needs of the parent.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. And it makes sense how it can get off track when a child is forced to do work that a child wouldn't normally need to do. And which was what happened in my case. Like when we talk about, my father and feeling as though I had to manage his anger in order to avoid some kind of consequence or punishment, or my mom's, negativity or pessimism or depression, and what would happen when I don't try to basically please my parents. Like it became my job, I saw, to do the work of trying to please my parents, not necessarily do things that I wanted to do or do things that seemed appropriate, but just like this became this overwhelming need to do this unnecessary work.
So that was, like you said, that was your job. You were doing, it's not that they weren't doing any work, but you were doing work in that relationship to stay attached. You were suppressing your own needs and desires. You were trying to anticipate theirs. You were trying to, as you were saying, regulate their emotions, manage their emotions. This is all work that you should not have had to do as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And it set you up for thinking that you had to do that work in every relationship.
Yeah, that became the norm. That's how I went into every potential relationship, any casual interaction, really.
And so that set you up again for relationships that were conditional on you doing certain types of relationship work.
Yeah, suppressing my own desires and wants.
And needs.
And yeah, just giving into these impulses that I learned from these very early days of, this person seems disappointed or whatever. That's my main focus here. That's the work that I need to do, is make sure this person isn't disappointed or angry or upset or...
That attachment, that relationship was conditional on you doing this work.
Mm-hmm.
So codependency,
yeah.
essentially.
Yep. Right.
And what we're looking for and what we want to talk about this season is a movement away from that conditional attachment to a conscious attachment. And so the work that we want to do is not work that is needed when you're conditionally attached, but work that is needed when you're consciously attached.
Can you explain that a little bit more, that what you mean by conditionally attached? Because, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can look at conditions that are actually maybe healthy conditions, right? Like expectations and things like that between two people. But when we're talking about this kind of conditional attachment, yeah, what?
I think that's a fair point. So when you're a child, it should be unconditional attachment and unconditional love. But yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying that as an adult, you should expect or offer unconditional relationships. You should have these basic expectations. But having the basic expectations means that you are consciously attaching yourself to these people. You are making a choice that's good for you in the attachment.
That's the big difference when I think about my experience of basically my entire life up until our relationship, being the conditions being ones that I created, others capitalized on, but the conditions being that I needed to somehow outwardly satisfy something. It didn't matter what I actually wanted. It didn't matter what my motivation, like if I was motivated by, when my motivations were almost never based on, I really want to be in this situation, or I really want to be in this relationship. And I'm coming at this because I want to make this work because I want to. It was more like I want to make this work because I have to. I feel it's somehow some like existentially needed to make it work.
So I'm suggesting that the relationship work of a conscious attachment has two basic conditions: autonomy and mutuality.
Okay.
And as you were just described, in your past relationships, neither of those conditions were met.
Right. Well, yeah, let's dig into those then. Yeah. Autonomy. That one, that it hits me immediately. Yeah, right. I mean, we've talked about this before where, my lack of boundaries basically meant that I gave up my autonomy. I didn't really want it.
You felt you had no choice really in being in those relationships.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And also that I had no choice in how to approach the relationship, what to do, so I'm just waiting. I was just constantly waiting for direction, being told what I needed to do, or at least shown in some way to where I would then interpret it because, oh no, this person is upset, so I must be doing something wrong.
And you would use the relationship speak to justify that situation and to rationalize that situation. Oh, relationships are hard. Relationships take work. I'm doing work.
I'm compromising with this, I'm
Right.
I'm making sacrifices for this person because they're upset and they need my help.
That's what people do in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the work of a conscious attachment. And I think it's also connected to how these negative connotations we now have with the word work.
Right.
Where it almost always means at this point compulsory labor.
Right.
So we have to do schoolwork because we're forced to go to school, and then we're assigned schoolwork, and we have homework, and then
our jobs.
And then when we grow up, it's absolutely compulsory labor where, we're forced to give our time and affection and attention, most of us, to jobs that we don't really care about.
Yeah, right. We may like it okay, but a lot of times, I've gone through this so many times. Just, is this job worth it? Is this? Mm-hmm. I mean, this actually, that's jumping ahead because really I didn't do that back. It was just like I felt like I had to, just like I did everything else.
And some people are kind of lucky or smart enough to figure out how to do work that is not compulsory labor with most of their time and energy. And so, then we get works of art and we get people's life's work, which is usually different than their job. And so, part of this is trying to reconnect with maybe an older sense of that word work and have it describe not labor that we are forced to do and directed to do, that is controlled and evaluated by other people, but it is work that is a genuine expression of who we are and what we value. So to do that type of relationship work. And in order to do that, you have to have a sense of your own autonomy. And you have to be prepared to both defend it, but also take responsibility for it. Meaning if you're in a relationship and you're doing work, you're making a choice to do that work, and you're making a choice to be in that relationship.
Yeah, that's an important thing to remind myself, that I'm making these choices on a regular basis, almost on a daily basis even. I'm choosing this relationship, I'm choosing the job that I'm doing, I'm choosing the work that I'm doing throughout the day. There's so many different kinds of work that people do throughout the day.
Absolutely. We feed ourselves, we take care of ourselves, we take care of the people around us, we engage with our communities and with people that we love. And so it's not, because I think work has kind of taken on this compulsory connotation, it's also sometimes thought of as kind of synonymous with difficulty or hard. So
yeah, right.
But good work, autonomous work, meaningful work can be pleasurable or it can be painful.
Mm-hmm. It can be difficult or it cannot be difficult.
Yeah, so we think of, say, exercising or working out. Sometimes that's unpleasant, but the benefits outweigh kind of temporary pain of that. And sometimes it is pleasant, and then you get the double benefit of doing something that's healthy for your body and then doing something that you enjoy. I mean, that's the ideal. But
yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example, because that's a calculation that most people can relate to, because that's a calculation that many people do when they think, do I really want to go to the gym? Do I feel like, is it worth getting in the car and driving there and, changing my clothes and all this, everything that it may entail going to the gym, just using a gym as an example,
mm-hmm.
and then doing this kind of painful, difficult work and then coming home, I know I need to do it. But then it comes down to, do I want to do it? Why am I doing this? What's my goal here?
Yeah. And is it meeting my goals, right?
Mm-hmm.
This kind of conscious, autonomous thinking. And sometimes the most painful and difficult work produces the greatest satisfaction and pleasure.
Yeah. I mean, the work of relationships. I mean, I can think of almost every time that we've had a really difficult conversation that we saw through all the way to some kind of resolution, that always has had a benefit.
It feels great.
It does. It doesn't just feel great, though. It adds to this whole bucket of experience and things that we can then pull from. And then the next difficult conversation is a little bit easier, and then a little bit easier.
But it also feels great.
It does, right?
I mean, sometimes it feels like we're standing on the top of a mountain and we're like, whoa, look what we just did, Look what we just...
And you know what that is? That's something that, I cleverly avoided for most of my life. That's our emotions telling us, oh, you did the right thing.
Oh, right. Right, yeah. So there has to be this sense of autonomy but also mutuality, which was also lacking in the work of your previous relationship.
Right. Well, if I were to dovetail from that example we just used of it feeling great when we resolve a conversation or something, in the past, when, say, I had one of these just really bad, say, one of those partners, like Jay in particular, like yelling at me for a couple hours or something, and then I'm just crouching down and waiting for it to end, and then it ends, and then I have this huge wave of satisfaction, relief, really. So that's very, very different, though. It's just relief that I'm not being abused anymore. But, I took that, I was like, okay, good. That means I'm satisfied in general because I got this wave of relief. But now that I'm able to read my emotions clearly, it's like, oh, well,
you can tell the difference between relief and real pleasure.
Yes.
And accomplishment.
Right. And there's been times where we've had difficult conversations where it didn't quite get resolved. And one of us could see that, where it's just like, something doesn't quite feel resolved here, and then that's a different emotion.
In these previous relationships, you did almost all the work.
Right.
And you were successful in, quote unquote, making the relationship work.
Yes.
But the person that it worked for was the other person.
And I did not want to actually be doing that work. I just had to. I felt this overwhelming need to. This kind of, I don't like using the word need, actually, but that's what it felt like. It felt like a need.
Why don't you like using that?
Well, because it's not an actual need. It wasn't a need. It was my trauma telling me that it was a need. But still, that's what it felt like. So that's the word I'll use.
Because it is you being thrown back into this childlike state where you were not able to meet your own needs. And so you did whatever had to be done in order to maintain these attachments that were going to provide those needs. And then so you're in these relationships, you still feel this need to maintain that attachment, even though, yes, your actual needs were not being met at all. So the relationship was not working in the sense that it did not work for you.
No, and right from the start too, which is what's so sad about that. Just when I've looked at those relationships so thoroughly at this point, and that need, that fear-based, powerless need, came from day one from both of those relationships.
So these things have to work together too, because you hear a lot from people who are struggling with codependency or maybe anxious attachment, or this feeling that they do so much for other people, that they do all the work in those relationships. And yeah, that's not good. But you don't hear the other piece for them. This recognition that they're autonomous human beings making a choice to be in these relationships. And if it doesn't work for them, then they need to leave or need to restructure that relationship.
Right. Rather than just continuing day after day, month after month, year after year of doing work and then feeling resentful for it.
A lot of resentment, which, as we've said in the past, is tied to this powerlessness.
Yeah, right. I mean, my days were fueled by resentment. That was my only way of getting through powerlessness, was to just internally feel as though, well, screw this person, but oh well, I got to do it.
So if we think of job work, for most of us, it's very hard to have that balance, to have both of those conditions fully met. That's why a lot of jobs suck.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we have the mutuality in that we give them our talents and time, and they give us a certain amount of money, which is sometimes sufficient and a lot of times maybe insufficient for the time and talent that we're offering. And then also it's hard to have that autonomy. If that mutual relationship is not working, there's a lot of us don't have the privilege to just walk away from it or to renegotiate it.
That's a tough one, right?
That should not be the case in our personal lives. Autonomy and mutuality is achievable. And
right.
I think, again, are the basic conditions to have a conscious attachment or a healthy relationship. So if we have those in place, which I think that you and I have both of those pieces in place in our relationship, what then is the work?
Mm-hmm.
So we have the conditions in place for a conscious attachment, but we need to do the work to make sure that continues to be a healthy choice for both of us.
Right. So we kind of broke this out into 3 different categories, and we'll go through each of these kind of briefly here.
Because in each of these 3 categories, so the tools that we're going to be talking about and that we have talked about all kind of fit in one of these 3 categories of types of work that we do in order to have this healthy relationship that works for both of us. So the 3 categories are knowledge and understanding. There's work that needs to be done under that category. Staying connected. There's work that needs to be done there. And then strengthening our partnership. So the knowledge and understanding, I think one thing to keep in mind, we talked about in, I think, season 4, using this construct of you, me, and us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That a relationship has 3 entities that need to be looked after.
Yeah, and I really love that because it's without that in mind, it's too easy to spend too much time on one or the other. Mostly for me being you, but really disguised as me. You know what I mean?
Or disguised as us.
Yeah, right.
Like, yeah. I'm doing this for the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Really,
I don't want to though.
I'm just doing it for you because you expect from me. So, we had the image of a 3-legged stool. You had to be tending. You have to tend to yourself. You have to tend to the other person, and you have to tend to this thing you're building together, which is the relationship.
And both people need to do that.
And both people need to do that.
The mutuality there.
That's
again.
Mutuality, yeah. And so then the knowledge, understanding, the work that we do is each of us learning about ourselves, each of us learning about each other, and each of us learning about our relationship. And there's various tools that we use in order to do that. Again, we'll be talking about those tools over the season. I would say lean startup methodology is one way that goes kind of under the knowledge and understanding bucket.
Right. Look at gaining the initial self-awareness of what is it I'm trying to achieve here? What am I doing?
And awareness about the relationship as well. Like, what are things that the relationship needs? What are places the relationship would thrive in? What are situations the relationship wouldn't thrive in, etc. So that's one tool under that. And then staying connected. that's a big part of the work that we do.
We talked recently about curiosity being a huge important factor, and we're going to do an episode on curiosity next as being one of these relationship tools. That's one of the mechanisms for staying connected is curiosity. In all three of these entities that we're talking about, in myself, what am I actually feeling? What do I want? And you, for the exact same reasons, and we're helping each other with that. So that's the mutuality, and then this curiosity about what is this relationship and what does it need.
That's definitely a way we stay connected is being curious about each other. And as you said, we're going to do an episode, and then we'll do other episodes that talk about ways to stay connected, tools we use, communication tools, sex is a tool,
right,
to stay connected. And then the last one is strengthening partnership. These are all obviously interconnected, but this one, the tools under that are things like compromise, repairing,
right,
recovering from betrayal, etc.
And the empathy that we just talked about as a tool, as something to remember to stay connected to, your empathy for the other person.
Right. Yes. So the empathy last episode, which is about strengthening that sense of partnership, that you were both on each other's side in a very deep, meaningful way, because you're capable of feeling with each other. Because I think a lot of times too, when you grow up being taught that you have to do the work of the relationship, then the other person isn't a partner, whoever it is, whether it's friend or lover, they're not a partner. They're always a potential threat, because they're always going to evaluate whether or not you're doing the work right.
Right.
The idea of relying on them deeply was scary.
Yeah, that's true. I kind of didn't go into interactions with that in mind, with the goal being a partnership. It was more like these individual moments of like, what do I need to do to neutralize threats or potential threats?
You were performing.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Like it was a job.
Yeah,
this
right.
was compulsory work,
Mm-hmm.
and they would evaluate your performance and give you good marks in which you would feel some satisfaction and relief, or give you bad marks in which you would redouble your efforts to perform in the way they wanted.
Right.
The tools that we're talking about, including empathy, are ones that you use with a partner, not to neutralize a threat. And they're the ways that we strengthen that sense of partnership between the two of us.
So knowing and understanding each other, making sure that we stay connected to that knowledge and stay connected to each other physically, emotionally, mentally, and then strengthening our partnership and continuing to do that on an ongoing basis. This whole package of things that are actually extremely satisfying when motivated by actual want and desire.
Yeah, it's great work if you can get it.
Yes.
Yeah. I say, it feels meaningful. It feels pleasurable. Sometimes it feels hard. Sometimes it feels painful, but ultimately extremely satisfying.
Yeah, when I think about people saying life's work or something, they're talking about like, an artist that does, here's my life's work. I like thinking about our relationship that way. Like, this is my life's work because this is the most valuable thing. There's a lot of other things that are fun and fulfilling, but the core of my life is our relationship.
Well, and to quote another person that we talk about a lot, Esther Perel, who's a relationship guru, couples counselor, she says the quality of our relationships determine the quality of our lives. So making your relationships your life work can make for a very, very high quality life.
Yes.
Just to sum up, it's good to have a thoughtful approach to the phrase and the idea that relationships take work. The work needs to be the right kind of work, done for the right reasons, and producing the right effects. And the person that needs to be evaluating that work, yourself.
Right.
Because it is labor that you do on your own direction in concert with someone, but to produce the kind of life that you want. It's not labor that you're doing because you're happen to find yourself in a relationship, even if it's in a marriage, and everyone's telling you, well, make it work.
Yeah, you just got to make it work.
That's not the work that we're talking about. That's not the work that we do, and that's not the work that we think others should be doing.
So again, the next episode, we're going to be focusing on this idea of curiosity as being a tool that we use, a very important tool that we use to stay connected in our relationship.
And to know and understand each other as well, and to strengthen our partnership. So it's a really
it's a robust.
It's a robust tool, and it's a tool that you struggle to first kind of learn how to use.
Yes.
And then, are still having difficulty mastering.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right. I mean, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about why we think that was and is.
And we hope you join us in a couple of weeks.